All right, welcome to the fourth installment of How the Camera Works, the Histogram. This is the finale for this week. Maybe. Just kidding, it is. The histogram. All right, that is basically, it's the digital readout of what your light reading is. And it's something that you have access to in camera. If you've worked in Photoshop or Lightroom before, you've seen the histogram. You've worked with levels or curves, you've seen the distribution of pixels, and you've messed with them. Well, that's inside your camera. That is part of the metadata, and it is something that you have access to while you're shooting. So it's important to know, one, what it is, how to read it, and then also another one of those things in the menu of your camera that you're going to want to get into to learn how to turn it on so that you can view it. So you can double check exposures. So the histogram, let's crack into that. There it is, that beloved title slide. We all live for that, right? So this is it. This is your histogram, and it measures the distribution of your pixels from pure black to pure white in your image. 0 being pure black, 255 being pure white, 128 middle gray. And you see this mountain range. This is our distribution of how our pixels are throughout the entire image. This is a relatively well exposed, right? There's just a little bit of highlight, very, very little white, a little bit of black, some good shadow tone, lots of middle, and nothing crazy as far as highlights go, right? So this is all the values of the pixels within your image. And this is essentially what our light reading is. This is what it would look like on this specific camera on the back, on the display. So you see people all the time shoot a photo and then look at the display and then shoot a photo and then look at the display. Yet that's not right. That's not knowing what you're doing. It's called chimping, and it refers to like a monkey could do it. You know, that like age-old put a bunch of monkeys and typewriters in a room, they're going to write Hamlet. Yeah, obviously not. But what it means is someone who's shooting like that doesn't understand exposure. It certainly doesn't understand a histogram. So what's great about the histogram is you can see exactly what your pixel distribution is going to be in your digital image when you pull it up. So this screen on the back of your camera, it's kind of like a Polaroid. If you know Polaroid, it's difficult to work with. Now this is definitely more fine-tuned, but it gives you an idea of what your photo is going to look like. This screen has a brightness level, and you can increase it or you can decrease it. And wherever you set it at, if that's what you're judging your photo as far as good exposure or bad exposure is by, you can have some quite surprises when you go to post. But it doesn't matter how bright or how dark this screen is, this histogram isn't going to change. This shows our exposure. It shows an accurate exposure of where our pixels are at. This has no black. Look at this. There's a little bit of black here. And if we can look past this, we see there's not really a lot. It's more of a dark gray. There's good shadow, but there's no perfect black, right? So it's important to know how to turn this on. And it may be a 2-button thing. When you hit your review button to pull up your image, you may have to, rotate a turnstile or hit down on one of the D-pads. That's how it is on an icon. And you can bring up not just your regular histogram, you can bring up the RGB. But the point of this is checking out your histogram shows you truly what your exposure looks like. This is what it looks like in Photoshop if you pull up your levels. And this is exactly the same histogram that we would see in camera. And this is, an example of a generally well-balanced histogram. Lots of, middle tones, a lot in the middle, just a little bit here in the black and the shadows, a little bit here in the highlights and the whites. So what this image would look like would be this. It's actually quite funny that the actual image references the same histogram. Look at that, same composition. But no, that histogram goes with this photo. And we see it's a lot of middle tone. There really isn't a whole lot of pure black. There's some good shadow. There isn't a real pure white. There's some good highlights, but overall, it's just a well-balanced, exposed, toned image. And that's the benefit of looking at your histogram and not just your screen. Now, of course, you follow your settings, your f-stops, you follow your shutter speeds, and you pay attention to your light meter, but this is giving you the true accurate reading. So like this histogram shows us a lot of pixels on the left-hand side in our dark tones. This is going to be a dark image. This isn't going to have a whole lot of highlight because everything is jumbled up to the far, so maybe it's underexposed, but it definitely is going to show us that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of dark happening. Here's an example of an extreme distribution. So this is, a silhouette, really dark shadow outline of this person against a dark or a bright background, and we can see that there's no middle tone. Look at our histogram. All the pixels are on the far left, they're on the far right, nothing really in the center. So if we were going for this extreme silhouette, looking at this histogram tells us that we nailed that. If we wanted a lower contrast photo, so we don't want a whole lot of dark tones, we don't want a whole lot of light tones, something that's in the shade, this is definitely a low contrast. Like, there's no solid black. There's some dark grays. There's no solid white. There's some light gray. But there's none of this extreme contrast at all in this image, and we see that absolutely represented in our histogram. Here's a normal, a relatively very well exposed photo, also in diffused light like the previous one, but we definitely have well-defined shadows. We have some good solid blacks, and we got some highlights happening here too, but lots of middle tone. Look at that. This is a lot of middle tone. Some good shadows. We got some dark tones, but this is a normal contrast. So if we were in this situation and we weren't sure, when we pull up our image, we pull up our histogram, this would tell us that, yeah, we have a good distribution of those pixels, and this is going to be well exposed and fairly easy to edit and post. And so we have access to not just the histogram of our blacks, middle tones, and whites, but we also have for our RGB, our red, green, and blue, the color values. And our color value histograms are separate. You can see that they don't exactly line up perfect. Now they're close, but you can see there's definitely discrepancies. So this is, again, something that's very useful on our end while we're shooting to cut some of our post time. So it's not like chasing our tail, but this is all information that we have in camera. So again, something that you need to look up on your manufacturer, how to get this up so you can view this while you're shooting. All right, so this is an example again of what our full histogram will look like when we get into the editing program. This specific one is the Camera Raw for a Canon, and this is Camera Raw in Photoshop. Our Lightroom is going to look slightly different, but not too far off. We will have this histogram panel, and this shows us all of the channels. Every single one. You can see how the pixels for each channel is distributed a little different. And in our image here, we see how well exposed this image is. So here's some examples of what you would be looking for on the back of your camera while you're shooting if you're not certain if you have the correct exposure or what you're really going for. This example right here, we can see the histogram shows all of those pixels again. They're on the far left. They're all in the dark tones. There's no highlights. There's no whites. So this is really underexposed. So if we were photographing this portrait of this person, if that's what we were going for, okay, that's great. But if not, if we really wanted to see all this information, then we know that we need to let in more light, because a histogram is absolutely telling us that it's not right. And this is the opposite. So this is an overexposed photo. We can see how those pixels are all jumbled to the right. This giant mountain here in the whites and in the highlights. Zero black on this edge. And we can see, looking past it, how really blown out everything is. And then here's a normal one. Now, mostly in the center. We got here in the highlights a little bit, you know, not too much here or any on that far left of the black, but still we have good shadow tone. We got some in the blacks. This is definitely something we can edit with in post, but we can see how this mountain of pixels here in the center shows that our exposure is a well exposed image based on the light meter, based on the histogram. Again, this is what we want to see from our histograms. Oh, did you see it? End screen? A histogram, camera, how it works, light meters, apertures, ISOs, shutters, lenses, wide angle, telephoto, pupils, glasses, focusing. There it is. That's it. That's how the camera works. This histogram is very important. Something to definitely get in tune to, looking at, not just looking at the back of your camera, but looking at the histogram, and to give you a more well-rounded idea of how your exposure is. Definitely a good tool. So that's it, how the camera works. See you guys next time.